let's go ahead and go kind of, end this conversation with talking about some of the things that other teams will try and copy. Let's be real. This is a copycat league. And when something is successful, other teams will try and emulate it. There were a lot of things that teams like Michigan did this year that they succeeded in that other teams tried to do and sort of failed. From the Michigan side of things, the three big experiments, if you will, of having a Daimara, Morez Johnson, Yaxel Lendeborg, all traditionally players who would play at the 4 or the 5, all being on the court together a lot. And that ended up working really well for them. I know is something other teams are going to copy. They're obviously not the only team this season that was successful doing that. You look at Arizona, you look at Florida, you look at several other teams like Duke, who were just had massive front courts and had some guys playing down at the 3. Florida being another example of that. That's certainly going to be a trend going forward. What are your thoughts overall on the things that you think are most likely to happen in terms of what coaching staffs are looking at and how they're trying to build title contending rosters based on sort of the trends this season, and what do you think will work?
Well, this is really interesting because so 2 years ago, UConn wins their second championship, and they're playing at one of the slowest paces in the country. They're calling a set on every play. And this was at a time where everyone is talking about, oh, we're going to get up and down. We're going to play fast. We don't, a lot of coaches really, loud about like, we don't run sets. We play conceptually. We play out of concepts. And then you've got like UConn who's like, yeah, we're valuing every possession. Like it's the last possession of the game, and we're calling a set, and we're going to value the rock, and we're going to try to get the best shot in every possession. And I kind of thought to myself, now this is something that might change college basketball. People are going to see the success of this, and they are going to say, okay, instead of just preaching, hey, we need to play fast, we need to play out of concepts, we are actually going to just, get guys that are, we're going to really drill down that we're going to learn bigger playbooks, and we're going to run sets, and we're going to slow it down. Now that didn't happen at all. And I shouldn't say at all, but it certainly did not. It doesn't appear like that really changed the trajectory of the sport at all, in my opinion. And the reason why I also thought that was something that was going to be replicated was the fact that, like, I know this is a little bit different than the consulting you did, but like, it wouldn't matter if like Bethune-Cookman or Wake Forest or Youngstown State was going to look at that run. They could be like, okay, well, like UConn plays slow, they play really methodically, they run a ton of sets. Like we can do that at our level. Like no matter what, anyone could have watched that and said like, yeah, like we probably need some like smart players, but like if we really work on this, like we can probably play really slow, run a lot of sets, not push the ball as much. So then you look at this and you look at like Michigan and you look at Arizona, and earlier in the season you look at the other one seeds. You look at like a Florida. What is Wake Forest got? Like, what can Wake Forest look at that and say like we can do that? What's like a Virginia Tech and like? So that's just why I'm like, I don't know if this is a trend necessarily. Now I know you also did say like teams that are trying to build national championship rosters, which is an elite few. And if this is the trend, like it is only going to be an elite few, because this is a trend that, like, again, if you are a mid-major team watching this, like there's nothing to learn from that really, like until you can get that kind of player. And I mean, unless you do just get whatever possible size and length you can and just put those guys out and have a little bit more of a leash of like, okay, we're going to be less concerned with ball handling and shooting because we think we can just put out as much size as we can at our level, whatever that may be. Maybe that's 6'8" at center and 6'7" at the 4 and 6'6" at the 3, but you're in the Ohio Valley, and that's just like whatever you do, you get that side. Like, maybe that happens, but I just don't know if that's actually going to really change things. And when it comes to the teams that are looking to build national championship rosters and have the means to do that, like, yeah, I do think the teams that have the money are, just like they did last summer, they are going to pay up for multiple 7-footers, multiple true centers, and feel free to put them out there. And for me, it's what's going to be interesting is what does everyone outside of those 10 to 15 programs do? Do they look at what UConn was able to accomplish this year? And I went back and like, well, they won 2 championships. I don't think anyone's going to look at what they did this year and now think, oh, we should play that way. But like, you also did see Iowa playing a similar style and beat Florida and go on a run themselves. Like, I do wonder if more coaches are going to look at that. But at the same time, if you didn't watch UConn win 2 national championships and say like, hey, I think this is something that could kind of work. I don't know if you're going to do it now, but for anyone outside of these national championship contenders, like that's just the thing. Is like I just don't know what people in one bid leagues are thinking about watching Michigan, saying, okay, well, what can we do at our level based on what Michigan did? How can we win our league? Well, it's just like at this point it's different games, and then like of course it would have been interesting if Illinois went a little farther just to see the conversations about furthering the European guys as well, and maybe that's a way that a year or two ago you maybe could get some front court guys for a little bit cheaper and guys that are ready to contribute right away. But like, man, now the pendulum might swing the other way, like seeing some of these guys. And for people listening that don't know, like the European basketball world is one that I am very involved with. And I am seeing guys that I don't think are very good that are getting much more than I think they should. And like, hey, that's all credit to them. But it's just funny, for years, it was an untapped market, and there was guys that should have got opportunities and didn't, or guys that like did come to college basketball, went to lower levels than they should, and now I almost feel like the pendulum going to swing the other way because of the success some guys have had. So I am actually like, while I for years have been someone that's like, I think these European players are amazing, I think that they're underrated. They're going to be like, I actually think that there's going to be a lot of European players that are letdowns this year because I think the pendulum might have swung the other way. So those are some of my kind of roster builds that touches on really all four teams, I guess.
There's so much interesting stuff there. I did some research a little bit earlier this season, looking at just what was the impact the actual international recruits that came in as freshmen, quote unquote, actually had this season. And basically what you found was you had some teams like Illinois and Virginia who found really great international recruits that ended up being top 3 to 4 players in their team and were awesome. But I know a lot of other teams sort of just viewed it as a like kind of hoping it was just throwing a dart at a dartboard and seeing if it stuck, and they got names, and some of those players just didn't pan out. And so I do think you're right. It's not just that any international prospect will work. It's about finding the right ones and knowing how to actually be good at valuing that talent. So that'll be interesting to watch. I do think just a couple notes from me on the Michigan thing specifically, because they're the one who ended up being the most dominant team this season, and everyone's going to be thinking about this as the likely blueprint for winning in the future. For starters, it's obviously well cataloged that Michigan had, among the largest resources of any team that ended up being in the sport this year. But it's not like they were comfortably number one. I don't know the exact numbers, but I would say there were probably 10 to 15 other teams that you could say were kind of in that range of spending a lot of money. Some notable teams that's been publicly stated, teams like Kentucky, who had over $20 million for their roster, obviously fell well short of what Michigan did this season. So it wasn't just throwing a lot of money at it, because a lot of other teams did that too. It was about doing it in a way that was smart, that fit their scheme, that found underrated talent at that price point. Players like Elliot Cadeau, who, I had rated a lot higher than he was viewed as a consensus player. He ends up being a really great fit for them. Obviously, they had to pay up for guys like Adai Mara and Morez Johnson, but the way that they have turned out to be as players this year was even better than a lot of other people expected. I will mention a little bit more detail on this later in the show. I know that Michigan used a lot of analytically driven tools like the front office suite, which is a tool that I have at evanmiya.com. They use that, among other things, to help shape their roster. And so it is not just about chasing the players with the biggest cachet who might cost the most money. It's about being really smart and efficient with the way that you're using your money. So obviously that's going to be something that I know every team is paying more attention to this offseason. The other couple trends I found are interesting is if you look at before this tournament, most teams who won a national title, if not all teams, had a strong reliance on returning players as a part of their roster build. I think every champion in the modern portal era until this year had over 50% of their minutes played by guys who were on the team the previous season. And then they brought in fresh talent through the portal or through the high school ranks or international ranks to sort of supplement that. But there was the bulk of their production still came from returning players. This season, the average percentage of roster continuity has dropped every single year over the last several years because of how much more fluid these roster situations are. So every single Final Four team this year still was above average in that department. I think the average percentage of minutes played amongst high majors by returning players was 30%. Every Final Four team was above that. So it still is important to be on that side of things. But Michigan was at 34%. In other words, 34% of their minutes were played by returning players. Everything else came from their freshmen or their transfers. So they had a challenge ahead of them of saying, how can we get all of these new pieces to be, I mean, you look at their starting lineup outside of Namuri Burnett, it was Yaxel Lendeborg, Adai Mara, Elliot Cadeau, Merez Johnson. They were the most important players on the team. They were able to pull something off that I don't think is a given for every team. So I really give them a lot of credit for that. And the last thing that I will mention is I think there is even though a mid-major team can't try and copy what Michigan did because they're just not going to be able to have the ability to get those same types of players, there is going to be and already has been a trickle-down effect from, okay, well, if the best teams at the very top are going to try and build this monster front court type of identity, what that means is the market for all bigs is just going to get astronomically big. Because if those players are getting taken off the board for high amounts of money, well, then the next guys who maybe wouldn't be good enough to play and start for a Michigan, but maybe they would be good enough to start for a Cincinnati or a Georgia or a St. Mary's or something, they're also going to want more money because they're the next ones in line. And so I still do think we're going to have a trickle down of the emphasis on bigs, or the amount of money it's going to take to get a quality big will be higher than ever before. What that makes me wonder is, will we see other types of roster builds that de-emphasize that for the sake of getting a better allocation of their money on talent at the other positions? Will we actually see those teams succeed more this year? I look at a team this year like Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt was not a team that had a classic big. Jalen Washington, I guess, was the big that qualified, but they were a more sort of guard and wing dependent team, and they found a lot of really good roster pieces both through the returners and through the portal of guys who were underrated but really fit and were very talented at their level. I wonder if we're going to see more teams like that be successful. Those are just kind of a few of the thoughts that come off my head as we discuss that. I will be doing a lot more research on the whole economics of the portal and things like that in the coming weeks, so listeners can stay tuned for that. But any final thoughts on any of that stuff that I mentioned there?
Yeah, I think that when you looked at the portal even 3 years ago, which is funny because it feels like an eternity ago, I felt like the most overvalued player was like the undersized combo guard gunner. And a lot of those guys that had really good production, raw production, I will say, a lot of those guys did really well in terms of getting to much bigger schools. And looking at the portal right now, there is just an absolute glut of guys that are 6'3" and under, not really point guards. And many of them have averaged in multiple leagues from low major to high major are averaging 15 to 23 points a game. Most shoot the ball pretty well. Most defensively are not great, and there's just so many players that are on good teams from good leagues averaging 17 points per game and 2.3 assists. And there's so many guys out there that a lot of teams could get excited, the fans could get excited about. And the story of this year's portal, as so much of that money has gone away from these guards and going to the front court, the story of this year's portal evaluations to me are going to be which teams can get the actual good players from that batch. I just think that's kind of my last portal kind of roster build type thing. But like, could you see someone end up with two absolute studs in the Vanderbilt type? Not that those guys were like, mid-major type, but like that style of like two really, really good smaller guards in the backcourt that can be awesome and lead an elite offense. Like, I wonder if that's out there somewhere for a whole lot less than building a roster the other way. And but yeah, just kind of generally speaking, like one look through the portal and that's what you see a whole bunch of, and you do not see a lot of impactful centers, and the ones that are there, man, are they going to get paid? So that'll be interesting. But yeah, those would be my final thoughts.
And if you're listening to this show and you want to track the portal closer, I have multiple times daily updated portal ratings for every single player who has announced that they're going to the portal or who has signed with teams. You can see my analytical evaluation of them and a lot more. So you can find that stuff at evanmiya.com.